Hello, and welcome to another edition of Ask the Professor, where we respond to your questions on economics, on the course of history, political philosophy, culture, including architecture. Yes, architecture, you can talk about that. All those things that concern us in our effort to live a good life together.
Right, here's one from Dennis, and he says, what do you think of the concept of white privilege and the associated notion that white people should feel shame and guilt over their race and maybe make reparations for past injustices against non-whites?
This is a potent idea, and one part of it deserves respectful attention, but the recommendations that it generates are so bad that you can see that something must be wrong with the core concept. The fundamental idea is that white people have it so easy, and that they have it so easy because of what they or their ancestors did to non-white people, that they have both personal and inherited guilt and they need to make good. And there's one thing I want to start on as sympathetic a note as I can muster that does seem to be true about the modern world, that most white people do not define themselves in terms of their race. They do not think much about race, because nobody is suddenly going to turn around and call them a really dirty, hurtful word. You can all think of the words, and I'm certainly not going to say them on camera. And that is perhaps the radicals have a point about this. Most white people don't think about what that's like. They don't go around thinking, gee, isn't it great that I don't think about being white, because they don't think about it. And it would be odd to have this experience of constantly feeling like, okay, I'm not white. This might suddenly be a problem. I might be insulted. I might be turned down for a job. If someone's rude to me in a store, maybe they're a bigot. But it's important, on the other hand, to realize that just because white people don't have that reaction when someone's rude to them in a store, it doesn't mean people aren't rude to us in stores. It doesn't mean our lives are actually easy. Every human life is filled with trouble and tribulation. Nobody has it easy, which is not an excuse for bigotry, of course, but it's a statement of fact that sometimes I think the people who talk about white privilege fail to realize how much that troubles them in their lives has nothing to do with bigotry, current or past. It's just part of being human. And then we get to this problem that white people maybe need to make reparations. We get these outrage, and there's a huge hoo-ha in Canada right now about cultural appropriation, because white people dare to write fiction that involves people who aren't white. And of course, the proposed solution, and I use that term in the loosest possible sense, would be white people should ignore non-white people, just pretend they're not there, ignore them, marginalize them, which was exactly the problem to begin with, or that everybody only reads the literature written by people like them, about people like them, for people like them. And that is clearly not a recipe for us finding our common humanity and getting to the point where nobody worries about race. I mean, my dream world is where skin color is as controversial as hair color. And maybe that's now considered passé by people who, funnily enough, have become obsessed with race from the other side than the old days when white supremacy was either an explicit slogan or was just taken for granted. But I'm not going to apologize for it. I look forward to the day when you will have trouble explaining to children what the idea of disliking someone for their skin color was all about. Never mind teaching them it was bad, trying to get them to grasp that it could ever have happened. Of course, there's one more possible outcome of this whole cultural appropriation white privilege thing, which is to say that there's one set of rules for non-whites and another set of rules for whites, and this time the non-whites get special benefits. And again, this to me, there's an old saying that people acquire the worst qualities of their oppressors. This would be, to me, a classic case of that. And then you get to this really vexed question of historical reparations. And here I come back to the fact that all human beings are flawed. We all suffer. We also all do bad things. Because the idea that because white people not only conquered non-white people, but sometimes did so in a bigoted spirit accompanied by massive injustices, doesn't mean that the people who are not white do not have problems in their own past. I mean, to take one classic example, take American blacks. And I say blacks, or African Americans, people use all these words, but the fact of the matter is that the vast majority of black Americans have considerable white ancestry. And that too is part of the sordid tale of slavery. But it means that if you're going to make white people pay reparations to black people, you seriously are going to have black Americans having to pay reparations to themselves. Unless you're going to take one of these one drop of blood doctrines. Furthermore, if you believe that in Africa, blacks did not oppress other blacks before European colonization, as they certainly have done in the modern world, then you don't know what it means to be human. Ditto Aboriginals in North America. All this talk about we want our traditional lands back. Well, how did you get your traditional lands? Who did you conquer, enslave, torture, massacre, or frighten off to get the land that you have now. And the idea, oh no, it was the Garden of Eden. No Aboriginal ever raised a spear against another Aboriginal until the evil white man showed up. That isn't just bigotry. That's comic book bigotry. You look at the history of the world before the great period of European exploration and conquest and after, and you find that people are very often going to war with one another, frequently on flimsy pretexts and doing terrible things around the world. Not because our skin is white, but because our skin is human. You cannot begin to undo all these historical injustices, including white people being unfair to white people. I mean, I'm part Scottish. Are we somehow to get paid back for the things we think the English did to us? And do the English get to deduct the times the Scots attacked them or were not entirely honest in their dealings? Or take the Holocaust. Surely one of the iconic crimes of humanity against humanity, and yet the perpetrators and the victims are both white. So are we to excuse Jews from white privilege because of the fact that they've often been treated wretchedly? In the end, you discover that you cannot group people together for purposes of historical praise, historical blame, historical reparations, or anything else without committing the profound injustice of overlooking that each and every one of us is an individual with strengths and virtues, with flaws and vices. And we need to get past thinking about people in terms of race. That was the whole point of Martin Luther King wanting his children judged by the content of their character, not by the color of their skin. There is no way of judging people by their race that is not unjust, that is not wrong, that does not generate pernicious consequences, and that does not violate fundamental rules of morality. So by all means be aware of the dangers of bigotry. By all means dream of a world in which everybody would have the experience that I think probably is more common among white people. Just as English speakers take for granted that people will speak English everywhere. Think about these things, but don't think about them in terms of how can we further divide people based on race. Think about how can we stop having race treated as though it mattered, because it just doesn't. If you're enjoying these commentaries, please go to my website, that's johnrobson.ca, make a contribution through Patreon, through PayPal, or otherwise to help sustain my work.